Ladies and gentlemen, how you guys doing? Matt the Butcher here. Today we're going to be looking at brines. This video that I've made is a fundamental video for a lot of recipes that are going to be happening in the future. I appreciate all you guys taking a look. Let's check it out.
Brines. What is a brine? Well, I've broken it down into two categories, wet brine and dry brine. Both create flavor, tenderness, and moisture retention. Let's talk about the basic wet brines. A brine is simply water and salt, but there is a big difference in these solutions, and it has to do with the percentages of salt to water. Let's look at three different commonly used wet brines. Equilibrium brine, that ranges from 1% to 5% salinity. Gradient brine, that ranges from 6% to 10% salinity. And flash brine, that ranges from 12% to 16% salinity. Let's take a look at equilibrium brine, or for short, EQ brine. For example, we have here a piece of meat that weighs 1,000 grams. For this brine recipe, you'll want to match the weight of the water with the protein's weight. So with that being said, we'll use 1,000 milliliters of water in this equation. Take the water's weight and multiply it by 4%. This will give you the amount of salt you will need to weigh out to achieve your desired salinity. Stir the salt in the water until dissolved. Then place the meat inside the brine. The ideal time the meat should be in the water is around 2 days per inch measured at its thickest point, plus a day air drying overnight in the refrigerator, but this step is optional. By the time the meat is taken out of the brine, the salt in the water has equalized through the meat to create a salt level of 2% through and through, creating a subtle and juicy flavored piece of meat. Let's recap with pros and cons. Pros: perfectly balanced salt level through the whole piece of meat. It's okay to leave it in the brine for a couple days or so if you forget about it or if your plans change, because it won't ever become too salty. Also, since this brine is measured down to the gram, it produces less waste. Cons: it takes the longest brine time out of all the wet brines, so you'll have to plan ahead. You need extra space in the refrigerator for the whole duration of the brine. On to the next one, gradient brine. This here is probably the most well-known brine out there. This recipe usually calls for 1 cup of salt, 1 cup of sugar, and 1 gallon of water. What this actually comes out to is, for every liter of water, you need 80 grams of salt. That's an 8% salinity. That's strong. And if you were to let it equalize into the protein, you'd have a really salty piece of meat. So that's why you cut the brine time down to 8 hours and up to 72 hours, depending on the density of the meat. As you see here, the chicken breast will brine for 8 hours compared to the beef brisket that can go up to 72 hours. This all has to do with the fats and density of the muscle fibers. Either way, once the meat is out of the brine, you need to rinse it and let it air dry in the refrigerator for 24 hours or overnight to let the salt disperse from the surface of the meat and towards the middle. Let's recap with pros and cons. Pros: it is a quicker brine time than the equilibrium brine, and it does impart an intense flavor. Cons: you cannot forget about this in the brine or it becomes too salty. Also, there is more product waste in the end compared to the equilibrium brine. Last but not least, flash brine. If you need to quickly and consistently salt a piece of fish or chicken breast or pork cutlet, flash brine is where you'll want to go. This brine consists of 160 grams of salt to 1,000 liters of water. That's around 16% salinity. The brine time for this is anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. Let's look at pros. This has the quickest brine time out of all the wet brines. This solution also evenly coats salt all around the protein. You'll also have a cleaner cookware, meaning you won't have little salt crystals all over your saute pan or grill area. Cons. The protein can become overly salted very quickly, and there is a lot more product waste. Okay, now on to dry brines. Dry brines basically follows the same principles as wet brines, except no water is added. The two that are commonly used are equilibrium dry brine, or sometimes referred to as EQ cure, that is with the addition of sodium nitrite and nitrate, and gradient dry brine, or commonly referred to as the salt box method. Let's look at EQ dry brine. This technique is usually used for meats that are going to be air dried, like bresaola or lomo. The formula is the meat's weight times the desired salt percentage, and you get your salinity. The curing or salting time really has to do with a few things, like how thick the meat is, or if it's extra fatty, or if it has a bone or skin still attached. These things increase the salting time for even curing. Here I have a list of some timelines I've used in the past that have worked out really well. Like the lean pork tenderloin I was going to turn into filetto would sit in the cure for 2 weeks under a vacuum seal, where a prosciutto with skin and bone sit in the salt mix for 30 days. This is important because when using cure salts, which both of those recipes do, you want to err on a few extra days for an even cure in color. Pros. This method is precise down to the gram. There is less product waste because of that. It is also easily stored in the refrigerator while being salted. Cons. Honestly, I can't think of any. This is one of my favorite ways to cure meats, and it's very precise. Gradient dry brine or salt box method. It's as basic as covering the meat with the salt. That is 1 day per 2 pounds of meat. This is the oldest known way of curing meats, and it is still used today. Pros. This is an ancient technique used by the first civilizations. It is also still being used all over the world on a mass scale. And it produces quality dried meats. Cons. Because of the amount of salt used, you cannot forget about this project. It's recommended to not reuse the salt after it's been used the first time. In that case, it causes more waste. You'll need a large enough space to cover the meat thoroughly in the salt, like a box, hence the salt box method. Okay, let's talk about additives. A lot of brines benefit from adding things like sugars, like white and brown sugar, orange juice, or honey. Acids, like lemon juice or apple cider vinegar. Herbs and spices, like rosemary, thyme, black pepper, and garlic. These ingredients aid in flavor development and helps balance out the salt. I'll be putting recommendation percentages for these commonly used ingredients for each brine method in the description below. Other additives like phosphates, sodium erythrobate, sodium nitrate, and nitrites can help extend shelf life, add color, and create higher yields, and generally regarded as safe if you follow the USDA guidelines with maximum levels allowed. I'll put recommended percentages below.
Wow, I know that was a lot of information. Thank you so much for sticking with me towards the end. Guys, this is the first video of a 2-part series. The second video is going to be on brine equipment, and I'm going to try out an experiment. Make sure you like and subscribe to this video because this is a fundamentals video, as I mentioned before, for a lot more content that I'm going to be putting out, a lot more recipes that I'm going to be trying out. Thank you very much.